Hey everyone, thank you for coming. Please know that this meeting is going to be recorded. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to make sure everyone gets on and then we'll get started. So let me share my screen. Go. Thanks everyone. Okay, I think what we're going to do is slowly get started as everyone else comes into the meeting. I hope y'all are getting in okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Just to let you all know a few of the kind of housekeeping type things. First of all, we have tried to upload this PowerPoint as a PDF into Teams, and for some reason it eludes us on how to do that. We're still learning some of these things, so please forgive us. I hope it sounds like you all got the message to come to this particular this webinar, and so you got the other session information. We'll be sure to send that out in our blast along with the recording for this. And so just be aware that it is going to be available, and so it just is not available right now. So it's coming. Two, we may have times to break. We're going to try and kind of hit everything pretty quickly. We have 60 slides, everyone, so it's a lot of information. So we're going to try and not have too many breaks in between for questions and kind of leave those to the end. However, if there is a must state something, please let us know. Raise a hand. You can put something in the chat. We have multiple people looking at the chat, so that's great. And lastly, because we're working with rental housing, the HOME-ARP team has worked really hard to align this program with all the other programs. And as you can see, we have some awesome people from our compliance department and the Office of Portfolio Management on the call. So if you have any questions about, oh, hold the phone, how is this going to work with what's already going on with rental housing and compliance? We have experts on the line as well. We've been talking with them for the last few months as well. So just letting you know, we're thinking outside of just this program. We're wanting to make sure that this is something that lasts well for the full 15 years. And we'll talk about that time frame in just a little bit. So if you have any questions, not only for us, but for our OPM team with regards to HOME-ARP, please don't ask them questions outside of this program. That would be great. Okay, so at that, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in to the webinar. So we are doing 3 informational sessions total. We just had one 2 weeks ago before Thanksgiving. And so that was around the general requirements for HOME-ARP. And so we just want to make sure that y'all are prepared if you're wanting to apply for this funding, which we really, really want you to do. But there are some specific parameters that HOME-ARP is mandating, or HUD is mandating, I should say, for the program. And so that's why we're having these. So that way y'all can get prepared when you're completing your applications. So, oh, let me go back real quick. So the third session will be on December 12th. So just know that it's from, okay, that should be 2:30. And I just realized that right now. So it will actually be from 2:30 to 4. It says that in the registration. So please be sure to look up the registration, 2:30 to 4. And we'll be sure to get some information and reminders out about that too. Okay. So there we go. So just a quick overview. HOME-ARP is the home program with a twist. And so when they did the American Rescue Plan, they had 3 ARP options. One is ARP, there's ARPA, and then there's HOME-ARP. That's using the American Rescue Plan dollars. This is the third piece that was attached to the home program. The changes are, instead of something that's income-based, which home traditionally is, this is housing-based. So these are individuals with certain housing conditions. Homelessness, at risk of homelessness, fleeing domestic violence or trafficking, and then severely housing cost burdened. It also includes some new activities, which is not just rental housing and building housing, which home usually does, and usually home traditionally does not single site, but do that too, but single residences, so single family homes, and then also apartment complexes for the most part, along with tenant-based rental assistance and a few other things. This program adds non-congregate shelters, which we're going to talk about on the 12th at 2:30. And then supportive services as well. And so, which we are actually planning to release a NOFO for supportive services in March, April. So please know that in January, we'll be probably having some information going on around that. And it's going to be in connection with our ESG program. So just, this is coming up. So just write that down. More information to come in January. Okay. We also can do some capacity building with this particular money too. And one of the things we've done, which I think several of you are a part of it who are on the call right now, are in the Supportive Housing Institute. So that's something that HOME-ARP has funded. And hopefully we can do it several more times. That's our plan. But as we know, the best laid plans, who knows what happens? We're going to try and make it happen. So like I said, non-congregate shelters. So a room for each household with a door that locks and a bathroom. Okay. Rental housing. So 1 household per apartment, and we are partnering it with our tax credit program. Supportive services, which are primarily within the McKinney-Vento parameters, and then our agency capacity building. So those are the main things that we can do with the funding. Considerations, which is why we're having these informational webinars, okay? Qualified populations and going into detail around them and why they're important. The referral to the units. HUD has had a lot of clinics for us around referrals to units. So it's a big part of the program to make sure that you are affirmatively marketing to all 4 of the qualified populations or the preferences and limitations that you have. So referrals are really important. And then making sure that if there is needs for those individuals who are in the qualified population units, that they can receive services. The federal requirements. So this is definitely a federal program with all those mandates, which includes procurement, and then the low barrier tenant selection and just kind of the housing first direction that this particular program leans toward. So I am going to turn it over to Jody, who's going to talk with us a bit about our qualified populations or qualifying populations. And Jody, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jody Key, and I'm a HOME-ARP specialist. The thing that is different about this program is the qualifying populations, the persons who are eligible to receive the services through HOME-ARP. Those are persons who are experiencing homelessness, at risk of homelessness, persons who are fleeing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking, and other households who are requiring services or housing assistance to prevent their return to homelessness. There are households that are housing cost burdened, who have 30% AMI but are paying more than 50% of their monthly income on rent. And these are people who may be, couch surfers, family or friends that are just going from one place to another to just sustain their housing. They actually have the money to pay rent, but there's no affordable housing out there, and they're just kind of moving from one place to the next. And this slide right here just kind of elaborates on the definitions of homeless. Again, it's, someone that doesn't have regular, adequate nighttime residence, unaccompanied youth under 25 years of age, at risk of homelessness. Again, it's the couch surfers who are living from house to house with friends and family. Maybe someone who's been notified in writing that they'll receive an eviction within 21 days. Persons who live in hotel motels that are in that gap where they're not eligible to receive a voucher for that hotel or motel, but they're paying for it themselves. And again, it's persons who are unfortunately fleeing domestic violence, human trafficking, stalking, and other populations, again, who are just overburdened in their housing each month, paying more than 50% of their income for their housing. You're on mute, Alona.
Let me just add something too with this. This really, what HUD was trying to do with these populations is oftentimes with our homeless programming, it's a very specific definition of homelessness. And those are people living in places not meant for human habitation. This expands that definition to be a little bit more toward the McKinney-Vento definition, which we often see in our schools. But also it kind of takes that middle place of individuals who are having a little bit more instability. And in some of their circumstances, they're actually pretty stable. Their housing may be stable, but they are just overburdened in their rent. They're able to pay for a hotel motel and they're paying for it for themselves. But as we all know, that can be a huge burden. Wouldn't it be great to be able to move into an apartment where you're paying 30% of your income? And then that way you can use the rest of that towards being able to pay for medication or even more food if you need more food. Because if you're paying more than 50% of your income toward household expenses, that really limits the amount of money you can pay toward other needs that you have. So this program is great about expanding the opportunities for individuals who, in some cases, not in all cases, but in some cases have been fairly stable given their situation. This will help them become more stable. And so obviously, if you're at 30% area median income, which is actually can be a little bit more money in the Atlanta area, as many of us know. 50% of that is a huge chunk, but if you're paying only 30% of your income in that amount, it could really help stabilize a family. So really this funding is about creating stability for households in rental situations. So thanks for letting me chime in there, Jody.
Absolutely. There are some preferences and limitations that a developer can put on a rental housing development, as long as they don't violate any applicable fair housing, civil rights, and non-discrimination requirements. The rental housing can be limited to a specific subpopulation of a qualifying population, as long as it doesn't discriminate any of those protected classes. They're all listed here. And upon approval by DCA and HUD, homeowners and developers may limit admission to provide a preference for HOME-ARP rental housing who need specialized services. So like the difference is if you have a preference, then you could have you're still serving all 4 QPs, but maybe a homeless or a DV preference would come to the top of the list. Everyone is still eligible for that housing. It's just depends on which preference you fall in, who's going to receive the housing first. When you have a limitation, you're limiting the entire development to one of those qualifying populations. And again, that's something that can be done upon approval by DCA and HUD, but we have learned from a previous non-congregate shelter award that we're in the middle of doing, that can be a lengthy process to just have a limitation. It took about 8 months for us to get approval for that, which in 8 months can be a huge gap in the timeline from actually being able to put, shovel to dirt and start the actual building of a development.
Yeah, and one more thing to add to that. So because of those situations that Jody just talked about, we really are um, wanting to fund applications that really don't have preferences or limitations. It would be a wait list, a wait list process that would be for all 4 qualified populations, first come, first serve. Okay, so it's not obviously preferencing one of those 4 qualified populations over the other. We're doing that very intentionally because HUD has also talked a lot about ensuring that these units are available to groups basically as open as possible as far as the fair housing piece, and making sure that they're accessible in the sense of being able to access that housing, not necessarily access for disability. However, that's important too, and they're totally supporting that as well. But that's the other piece. So at this time, we are not really going to have preferences and limitations for the housing for this round, but we're looking at doing it again in the future. And we'll talk a little bit more about those opportunities later on in the webinar. So thanks for letting me pop in there again, Jody. So.
Absolutely. And like Alana said, we're going to get this PowerPoint out to everyone, but this just lists the different fair housing requirements in 24 CFR 5.105 that you need to make sure that you're following so that there's no one that's left behind and that all of this is in compliance with the program.
So let's talk about the activities that we can do for rental housing. The list is long. It's acquisition and rehab, absolutely. We can convert non-residential buildings, site improvements, related soft costs and demolition, and even developer fees. So this funding can be applied toward a lot of different parts of your housing development. It's going the wrong way. We are going to try, and we can pay for relocation costs as well. For this particular round, however, we're going to limit that just because we are still learning, and this goes to our OPM friends on the call. The displacement piece that would happen with regards to relocation, because they would have to make sure that they qualify for HOME-ARP if they move into those units. And so that requalification piece, we want to make sure that we are moving into it intelligently and making sure the compliance pieces are all in line. And so we are trying to not really do a whole lot of relocation. So if that is the development you're considering, to have relocation, we may need to have a conversation around that as far as the details of that, or look into the regulations for this to ensure that we would limit the displacement potential for the relocated individuals in your buildings. We also have we'll talk about the cost assistance. We're going to be we can do operating cost assistance, but since we're putting project-based vouchers or planning to put project-based vouchers onto these units, that actually it's an either or. So our focus is going to be more on the project-based voucher piece. But if you want to learn more about all these areas, they are in the Notice 2110 for HOME-ARP, which you can look into as well. But at this time, the operating cost assistance, we're going to do more of the project-based voucher direction versus this. So just letting you know. So rental housing must meet the definition of project in the notice that I just talked about, CFR 92.2. And then also for the general home project parameters, we would need to have 1 qualified population person or housing per project. Most of you, if not all, are going to do more than that. That's the whole focus of the program, and we'll talk about the different percentages in a little bit. the costs associated with the HOME-ARP units and proportionate share of the common areas, underwriting and subsidy layering that are required. And we will have to do cost allocation when layering with other funding sources. So that's going to be an important part too. So let's talk about referrals. I know we make a lot of mention about referrals, and part of that is because we want to make sure that these particular units are reaching the individuals who need to be placed in these units. And so HUD has been really clear about wanting to have good referral systems put into place to ensure that everyone who is eligible for the unit hears about it. Okay, so that affirmative marketing plan piece is really important. And I'll talk about that in just a second. It's coming up next. So they also talk a lot about coordinated entry. We are not expanding coordinated entry. I went into that a lot in our last webinar, so please listen to that if you'd like some more information on that. And for coordinated entry with other referral methods, essentially, it's just making sure you tell everyone who works with homeless individuals about your units that are available. Or if there's another agency that works with people at risk of homelessness, you make sure that they know about the units. And essentially, it's just making sure that you're marketing to everyone so that way they know about the units, and that way they can apply for the units if there's a vacancy. So this all leads to our service plan. Every applicant, whether it's rental housing, non-congregate shelter, even supportive services, is going to have to put together a service plan. And essentially, it will talk about the plans for outreach. So how you're planning on marketing to the 4 qualified populations, as well as getting referrals for those populations in case there is a need. Now, that we are not mandating supportive services with this program. We are encouraging enriched property services, which many of you who are developers out there are aware of. So a CORS certified group or something similar to is going to be recommended. So that way there's an option for individuals who have needs to get those needs met. It will not be supportive housing, as it's known, is not necessarily going to be a requirement. You won't be required to have an MOU, but you will be required to serve individuals with needs if they have them. Okay, so that's why the enriched property services and the QAP is a good fit with this particular program, because if you have someone who is at risk of homelessness, they may have some basic needs that they're going to need to get referrals to. They may need to get connected with case management, not necessarily on site, but maybe with someone who is connected to your apartment complex. So be thinking in those terms as far as any kind of services, and be proactive. If you want, we highly encourage so many people to apply for these funds because it's a great opportunity to get homeless units into, and at risk of homelessness and people with needs into, especially communities that don't have a lot of those support systems. Super great opportunity. And in that frame of mind, start thinking proactively, like what agencies you can work with. It's great to work with the agencies anyway, because I can pretty much guarantee that there are going to be other people at your properties outside of these 4 qualified population units who probably have needs too. So it's a great opportunity to start working with other agencies if you're not already, because I know many of you will do, to start kind of thinking proactively about how to integrate a lot of those systems and services into your property. So HUD has, again, a ton of information on their website, which we're going to talk about at the end, as far as referrals and referral methods, coordinated entry. So please check these out. You will get a copy of these PowerPoints and there'll be links there. So let's talk about some underwriting, which I know y'all are super excited about. This particular funding, so let's take it from HUD's perspective. They were pretty much anticipating that a lot of these programs are going to be using the low-income housing tax credit program. They're going to use project-based vouchers. They've been highly encouraging of that, and combining lots of different funding sources and layering them into the developments. Okay. They've even allowed us to increase the developer fee, and we are looking at options to do that. We're kind of finalizing our underwriting direction, which we will release at the beginning of next year with the stable housing NOFO that we're doing in partnership with the Deputy Commissioner's Office. And I know many of you know John Stovall. He's working on a single site supportive housing portion of that NOFO, and then we're going to have our HOME-ARP portion of that NOFO. And so it's going to be a great opportunity for many of you. And so we're really excited about what we get to do with the money. And so part of that is potentially really increasing that developer fee. And again, because there's no income requirement for the 4 qualified populations, it's based on their housing status. That piece around the project-based vouchers is really important. And so that's really what we're doing for the proposed subsidies. HUD created kind of multiple options that the state could do in order to provide that missing amount of money, the subsidy need. And so because of all the project-based voucher directions that our HCV team is taking, they've allowed us to kind of potentially, get some of those project-based vouchers to apply to our units. So that application will be a part of the NOFO that we're releasing in January. And so we're going to be doing it alongside that team. And so we've been talking a lot with them and really coordinating a lot with them. And if it's not even, well, let me say we're including the application. I think their submission date is going to be just a little bit off, but we are wanting to coordinate that, especially for your applications that are due in May for tax credit. Okay, so just know that we're working to coordinate all of these different pieces to make this work together. Okay. So like I said, our strategy, we have about $50 million to spend on rental housing. We're going to be releasing funding in 2025, like I said, in January with the 9% round under the favorable financing kind of section. It's going to be in that stable housing NOFO, like I just mentioned. And considering how much we spend or need to spend, I should say, we are open to having another round for 4%, and then also in 2026 for the 9% round again. Our hope is that we're going to get maybe a little bit more specific in those other rounds as far as where we would like to spend the money. So potentially doing a single, supportive housing type direction in 2026. We're still working out those specifics. There's a lot of logistics for HOME-ARP to make that work. But that is kind of where we're heading. So just know that we have that in our mind to do. And so again, applicants who are awarded the HOME-ARP funds under favorable financing not only would get the money to use toward their development, but they would also get 4 points with that favorable financing lens. Okay, so that's a big thing. And so look for that stable housing NOFO. We just talked about it last hour. And so that's coming out. We are going to be having some introductory webinars about it, probably at the very beginning of February. We're going to be talking about it at the QAP workshop, I think on the 4th of February. And so we're going to have all these different pieces. So definitely know that that's coming. The subsidy through the project-based vouchers I talked about. And currently, we're not planning to release the funds separate from tax credit rounds. So therefore, if you are not a tax credit developer, Okay, so you've not done anything like that before. Now's the time to start looking to partner with a tax credit developer. And I'm sure that there are many out there who are willing to come alongside you and help you. And so just start thinking in that direction as well, because we really, right now, that's just the direction that we're taking with the funding. So uh, that may change. I'm not making any guarantees, but at this time, we're doing it under favorable financing for the QAP. So you need to be a qualified developer for the state of Georgia in order to use the HOME-ARP funding for this next round in January. Okay. The loan overview. So this is very basic. It's going to be similar to the other NOFOs that we've had in the past. So just kind of think in those terms. I can't do too many specifics around this because, like I said, we're going to have more information coming out. But $2 to $5 million per loan on average, 15-year loan and compliance period. And so we have talked a lot about this with our friends on the call from OPM as far as how long to do that compliance period. And because HUD recommends the 15, well, actually, they require the 15-year piece or more. We're going to kind of stick to that 15-year piece, but then that means the whole package needs to be 15 years. So that means the loans as well as the compliance period all need to be under the same time frame. Okay, so we're going to try and stick to that as close to possible. We have some wiggle room there if we really, 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 really need to, but we're going to stick to that in order to make sure that in 15 years, my friends at OPM still love us and do not have dark feelings towards us because we want to make sure it aligns to what they're doing. We're really trying to be nice to OPM and really organize this with them. And so just because I know that they have so many different properties that they are overseeing, and this is going to be really a relatively small group of properties that are going to have HOME-ARP. So we want to make sure that it is something that kind of aligns to what they're already doing.
Alona, there's a question in the chat. Would you like to answer it now or later?
Just let me finish the slide and then I'll answer it. Yes, I
Good
saw
deal.
it pop up. Thanks, Jody.
Okay.
So final underwriting guidelines are being completed. We're going to get those out to you. Project-based vouchers will be used to subsidize those units. I talked about that. And we're working with those developer fee options since HUD's given us some leeway. So Samantha asked us, when you say potential for 4% projects, what are you thinking? So what we're thinking, that's a great question, Samantha. Thank you for asking it. So what the plan will be is we are planning to release probably right around $20 million-ish for 9%. Obviously, we have $50 million. We wanted to kind of group them in sizable chunks because we also have to spend the money. We want to get it out. We have to have the money spent by 2030. Okay, so we don't have a whole lot of time. We have very limited time to do this. So we have to get it out essentially within the next 2 years. So depending on how many people apply for the funding, come May, or well, I guess for the NOFO in March when it'll be due, how it plays out with the 9% round. We don't know how much money we're going to be ending up spending. Our plan is the $20 million, but it could be more, it could be less. And so obviously if it's less, we'll want to offer it more for the 4% round. Potentially, the main thought was around just 9%, but we've also had some interest in 4%. So we're not opposed to that. And we really will know more after the applications come in March and after we decide who gets what funding in April. So I know that feels very vague because quite honestly, we just don't know who's going to apply for what. We know we've put together some great thoughts and ideas around it. And if we're able to spend all the money sooner, that would be great. But if we need to offer it more often in order to make sure we get all the money out, we're open to that too. So that's kind of what we're thinking. We're trying to be as flexible as possible in a smart way. So then that way it makes sense to everyone that we're honoring our friends in OPM. We're also, helping to honor our developers and property managers and all the work that you guys put into the developments as well. So I hope that we just don't know what the response is going to be come the beginning of next year. So does that answer all your questions? Thumbs up. Happiness. Thank you. Okay, great. Can you clarify whether the program also includes grant funding, or will this be, it's going to be loan funding only. So it will not be a grant. It will be a loan. And again, it's a loan under the tax credit program. So that's what the focus is going to be. We will be doing supportive services that will be a grant come next March, which we'll talk about more next year. And then we also have the non-congregate shelter money, which will be a grant as well, but it looks a little different. Okay. Does that answer your question, Corey? Okay. Yes. Okay, great. The one thing too, just to make sure all y'all who are planning for this funding, which I hope many of you are, there is a 70-30 rule that HUD included with this funding. So 70%, technically 70% or more of the units, so it could be 100% even, need to have QP units, so qualified populations, those 4 qualified populations. And then 30 units or less can have low income units such as home units. So we're able to kind of, as you can see here, these are the examples that HUD gave us. We can be flexible with the amount of units that you want to have. We are preferring to do more QP units than just low income units, which technically the low income units are just like regular home units. So they're the AMI, I believe, is 80%. They have a 65% in there that I'm still trying to figure out what that all means, but it's 80% area median income. And then so you'll be able to actually ask for, and you would be able to have them spend high home on their rent. And so because of that, it obviously increases the justifications with the units and what your the justification. Okay, sorry, I was reading the chat. So therefore, if you have some high home dollars on there, working out all the logistics of the I can't think of the word. I know that there's a formal term for it, but I can't work it out in my head right now. So with the units and the cost per unit, when you're working out the feasibility of the property, this is something that we can play with as far as QP units with a project-based voucher, which those can only apply to those QP units. Those project-based vouchers can only be on QP units, and then regular home units at high home rent. Okay, so 70% need to be qualified populations, 30% or less can be those low-income units / home units. Okay, so just kind of think about that. It's something we can play with. What is the minimum number? Okay, we have a question from Visionaire Consulting. What is the minimum number of units a project must have to qualify for this funding? That's a great question. So with a project-based voucher, okay, so let's go back to the project-based vouchers. The project-based voucher applications, they're wanting to have at least 15 qualified 15 units with vouchers on every property. Okay, so if they're writing a HAP contract, they're wanting to do it for 15 units or more. Okay. For our funding, we would like to have 15 units or more of the HOME-ARP units. Now, again, there are a lot of pieces that kind of play into that. The cost per unit can go up and down. We don't have any of those minimum maximums that home has. We are flexible when it comes to the cost per unit. We've kind of generally had about a $300,000 per unit thought in our mind. But again, we can go higher if we need to. We can go lower. We're wanting to spend around $5 million per property. And that's kind of been how we've been moving forward. So given how many units, I think it's about 24, 25 that can be in at that amount per property for $5 million. If my math is correct, I need to probably redo my math a little bit in my head, but y'all kind of get the idea of where that's concerned. So there's no minimum, there's no maximum. We just want to have as many units as possible that are serving home, people who have unstable housing situations. But we can work with that. So I would probably say try and be relatively conservative with that. We're not going to ask you guys to, to do anything uber crazy. It's funny. We're going to try to avoid that. So please confirm if the 70-30 rule applies for phased out projects. I noticed examples show multiple projects, but what about multiple phases? Wow, that's a really good question, Regina. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. It would have to be, the 70-30 rule would be applied for every, I guess, iteration. And again, it could be 80-20. In some circumstances, like this example, it could be 60-40. So we can play with those amounts. If you're thinking about phased out projects, like this is just these are just examples for our whole portfolio of HOME-ARP for the state of Georgia. We have to have 70% or more units that are qualified populations, and then 30% or less that are the low income units. I shouldn't say populations, units. So we're going to have some properties that have 100%, which we already are kind of moving in with some initial funding that we've already done with other grants. I mean, with other, not grants, with other NOFOs. So we did one with the 2023 NOFO. So there may be 100% of the units that are qualified populations. And then there's others that if we need to, because of the way that your structure is with your units, we may need to do more home units. So it gives us a little bit of movement for the whole portfolio of HOME-ARP units in Georgia. So just know that we're kind of working with it. So obviously, the more qualified populations that you have on site, we're going to be preferring, just because it allows us to stay away from that 70-30 split where it gets to be unhealthy, because we can't have 69, but so yeah, 69-31. That can't be an option. Hope that answers that question, Regina. And then Michelle asks, will LIHTC minimum income limits apply under this program? So I may need some support here from OPM, but with it, they shouldn't, because we'll have the project-based vouchers on the QP units. And so it would be at 30% area median income for those. And so it would be those income limits for them. And then we would have the low income units, which would be, I think, 80% AMI. Does anyone from OPM want to chime in on that? I don't see an issue with this.
No, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's layered, you're going to use the most restrictive program layering. And so if there's a voucher in place, that's what's going to dictate the rental amount.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. So I just went through the 70-30 piece as far as the project-based vouchers go. Really, like I said, those vouchers really are on the QP units. So just start thinking in that direction. And again, the reason why we're using those project-based vouchers is because we do understand that individuals living in those units will probably not be able to pay, a large amount of money towards rent. That's why they're part of the 4 qualified populations to begin with. And so in order to subsidize that, to make sure that y'all are being able to get the maximum amount of rent for those units, we want vouchers on them. And then again, we have the 30% or less of the home units that are at high home. So that way, hopefully, all of the logistics with regards to your unit makeup start to make sense when you guys are doing all of the math with all of your famous Excel spreadsheets. So so that just kind of sums that up. You guys have had some great questions. So we did have a question before as far as was it, no, it was something else. I'm thinking of a different thing. So the commitment, really, we're going to have a written agreement that is with the HOME-ARP program. We really need to get the budget and schedule of what you plan on doing with your development. The underwriting piece is super important, and we're going to have to do a lot of reviews with regards to the subsidy review for project-based vouchers, as well as any cost allocation reviews that may need to happen, considering the layering, and then, you know, the final overview of what's going on. And then construction does need to schedule to start within 12 months of the signature on our written agreement. So that would be post environmental review, post federal requirements, those things. Once we do that closing, signing of the contract, there must be construction within 12 months. Would age restrictions be allowed with this? John, that is a great question. And actually, I have posed this question multiple times to HUD. So it's more like this one may be coming a little bit later on down the line. So with that, because of the familial, as Jody alluded to under the 4 qualified populations, the familial status piece is really important. So we had in our previous 4A with, as she mentioned, non-congregate shelter, we kind of looked into like even youth specific housing. Okay. Again, it's that familial piece. So they need to be able to bring kids into the property. If they have a family, you can't say no to them. If there's a family who can't, I guess, discriminate against families, and other of those 4, of the 7 protected classes. So when it comes to age restrictions, HFOP may have a little bit of wiggle room because of 55 plus, and you have the 80% that would be 55 plus, and then you have that 20% that you kind of mess with a little bit with as far as ages go. But 62 plus, that would be something that I would be hesitant towards just because of that familial piece, because that may get messy. So we haven't gotten a firm do this or do that. Essentially what they said last is it kind of needs to be determined. I think they mentioned like with the property, and I was like, okay, that makes no sense. And I keep kind of pushing them on this particular topic, and they've not given us a for sure this is one way or that way. So I would probably say if you're going to do age restrictions, I would probably lean more towards housing for older persons, but I would also make sure that you have some contingencies in place to make sure that you would be able to house families in potentially all of the units that are HOME-ARP. So I hope that answers your question, John. But know that we have been asking that. Okay. Oof. Good questions. Okay, good. So we have about 40 minutes left. Okay, so I have one more question. I'm gonna answer Anne's question, and then we're gonna move forward, so then that way we can kind of get through the rest of these, because we're only at slide 28. So Anne, let me answer this question, and then I'm gonna pause the questions until after we get through federal requirements. So we currently provide supportive services, and we'll be applying for it in the first round. Okay, my question is if funded, are there opportunities to expand our project acquisition or development? Okay, so Anne, I think we may need some more information When you say we'll be applying, you mean applying for HOME-ARP? So I'm guessing in your current development, you are already providing supportive services and you're applying for HOME-ARP to expand your project. So I guess this would be a phase 2 or a phase 3. Yeah, I would say that, I mean, we would have to, look at your proposal. I mean, I would apply for the NOFO, but it seems like that would definitely work if you guys already have a tendency to provide supportive services. And if you want to expand your development, I think that would totally be possible. So, yes. Okay, so I'm going to move on to federal, but we may need to circle back and get a little bit more information, but that looks like it would be a possibility if I understand what you wrote correctly. So federal requirements. We do have to do all of the federal requirements, including Davis-Bacon. So going back again to the requirements for project-based vouchers of 15 units, because it's more than 11 units, there is going to have to be Davis-Bacon on the property. So just know that going in, okay? Environmental reviews, we definitely have to do. Phase 1 for sure. And I don't think phase 2, but definitely your phase 1s will have to be done alongside all of the other tax credit pieces that you're doing. Okay, so just think this is also in addition to LIHTC. Okay, so if you're already doing it for LIHTC, it'll probably just fit right into what you're doing for LIHTC. That's what I was meaning by that. Davis-Bacon. So make sure that you're thinking Davis-Bacon as far as receiving those prevailing wages. So we'll be sure to take you through that if you get funded. You see here, here we go. Maybe Weeby, it's definitely going to be a part of it. So just know that you're going to have to make sure that that outreach effort to minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses need to be a part of your project development. And then also section 3 to ensure employment opportunities for low-income workers. Okay, so all of these provisions are going to be a part of HOME-ARP. This is a link to the site for DCA. So that has all the provisions for the federal requirements, and we are actually building up our team for our federal compliance to make sure that we're available to meet all of these needs, because we know that there's going to be an uptick in the federal compliance needs with the HOME-ARP funding. So just start thinking in that particular arena as well. Okay. Procurement. Also be thinking as far as procurement goes. So before you start moving forward, you want to get the funding. If you're wanting to go ahead and procure some really big spending type things that you're wanting HOME-ARP potentially to pay for, or part of HOME-ARP to pay for, start thinking about procurement. So just making sure that you're taking those steps when you're procuring those large items, including the contract work. So if you're contracting with a particular architect or even like a general contractor, things like that, make sure you're doing all the procurement steps if you plan on getting this funding. Okay, so just think ahead in those arenas. Okay, I highly recommend, if you don't already have a federal compliance specialist on board, please get one. Federal compliance specialist will help save you in so many circumstances. So please be sure to take a look at that. Okay, so I'm going to move, and Brock, I'll get to your question in just a second. Let me just finish this section. So here are the forms and templates. Again, you'll all get this PowerPoint, and it includes all of our requirements as far as the affirmative fair marketing, the Georgia state requirements, and then also the language access plans and those requirements. Okay. So we'll talk construction in just a second. I may have missed it earlier. Will newer projects that didn't have a chance to receive vouchers through DCA's PBRA NOFA have opportunities to receive project-based voucher PBRA commitments? Yes. So that application is going to be alongside, I think the submission dates may be a little bit different, but we're working with our project-based voucher HCV team to have those vouchers put onto our qualified population units. So we're working with them to do this in tandem. Now I'm going to tell y'all, project-based vouchers are just getting started at DCA. HOME-ARP is a new program. I'm just going to say, please have some grace. We're working out the logistics for this too. We'd like to hope and wish that it is super smooth and goes perfectly. But as we know, sometimes that doesn't always happen. So just think in that direction. It sounds like most HOME-ARP, I'm going to finish this question. It sounds like most HOME-ARP recipients would be expected to have PBRA commitments. Is it expected that PBRA commitment is in place before the HOME-ARP app? No. So we expect that if you plan to apply for DCAs, project-based vouchers, it should be right alongside. Now, the submissions will probably be separate. You can't submit for our NOFO and then also have a project-based NOFO at the same time. I think it's going to be a little bit separate as far as those go, but we've been working with the team to layer the project-based voucher onto the HOME-ARP units. So we've been thinking in that direction. So I hope that answers your question, Brock. Now, if you guys are in a jurisdiction that does not port in DCA vouchers, you may have to do some footwork on your own and talk with them about getting those vouchers from them. So if you guys come in already with a commitment from a local jurisdiction for the vouchers, awesome, that's fabulous. But just know that if you are in a DCA PBV location, that we are trying to work with our department in order to layer those in. So it's kind of a both, Brock, so, and others out there. So, okay, construction submission. We have about 30 minutes left. So I know many of you are very familiar with this. A lot of you have been doing developments for a long time. And so this is all just the normal stuff. Essentially, it will be home funding, okay, just with the twist. So a lot of these construction pieces are going to be completely in line with the home program, okay? When we looked through our regulations for HOME-ARP, this piece aligned pretty closely to what home is doing. We didn't find any one-offs with this. So just know that your process for construction is going to be right alongside what you're already doing for home regular and traditional, okay? I'll answer the question that just popped up in just a second. So this is just the list. I'm not going to go through all of it. Y'all can read it later on. So we have single room occupancy, additional information. So although HOME-ARP funds can be used to develop rental housing, and that includes SROs, we're going to be more restrictive. So we're not really going to do a whole lot of SRO development. It is a potential, and we may look at that in future funding rounds. Again, it needs to be ready to build within 12 months. Completion must be within 3 years of starting the process. And you have to complete all the requirements as outlined in the QAP. So just know those requirements, okay? So let's talk about tenancy. Okay. Okay, I think that we have someone who is in need of housing. This particular program, I'm afraid, is to build units. This program doesn't currently fund units at this time or fund any particular we don't have a place to help you move into at this time, but what we do is we do have your information, and we will definitely get it to our homeless program and our homeless info group. And actually, Jody, while we're on, if you wouldn't mind shooting her information to the homeless info, while I do tenancy, because I know you're going to be doing compliance in just a second, if you wouldn't mind sending her information to the homeless info email, that'd be great. Thanks. Thank you, Priscilla, for letting us know, and we hope we can get you something soon. So let's talk about tenancy. So the overview for tenancy, so the housing needs to be permanent. This isn't a short-term thing, so just know it's an apartment. We're trying to kind of move into the housing first model. And so really trying to get people in place. And so low barrier tenancy requirements, looking to help people get placed, and not having a ton of restrictions. Okay. So that their acceptance of any services is not conditional of occupancy. Again, services are not required in order to, with the building and the development of these units. So, but if you do happen to have services and they happen to be someone who's a part of, I guess the units for qualified populations, mandating them to receive services or case management is not okay. So, but hopefully, I don't think that would be necessarily the case with many of our developers and developments for this at this time. Everyone is provided a lease agreement. Services must be available and accessible to tenants if they need it. And then you cannot terminate tenancy or refuse to renew a lease of a tenant, except for a really serious and repeated violation of the terms of the lease. So essentially, and I know that there were some concerns around evictions. Now, the eviction policies that are in place are essentially what you would have for the prevailing program. So since we have project-based vouchers on those units, it would be the project-based voucher eviction policy that you would need to look at. Okay. If you're looking at like the traditional home units, that eviction policy is going to have to be kind of alongside that home type, home unit essentially. And so again, I know for home units, it would be for serious violations. So, and Princess, I know that you are our local home expert. Are there any particular eviction and tenancy renewal pieces that need to potentially be considered with regards to kind of like home type units, or is it just, and I know I'm just springing this question on you right now and you weren't prepared necessarily. So, is there anything, I mean, as far as it's mainly just for serious violations, if I'm not mistaken, for the home program, correct?
I do believe so, but I need to further review that, but what it is. I'm sorry, I went out. I do believe so, but I need to double check.
Okay.
Mhm,
Cool beans. Well, and if you're really interested in knowing, thank you for that information. If you're
mhm.
interested in knowing more about that, we can definitely get you the regulation requirements for that. But I do believe it's just for the serious and repeated violations in terms of the lease. Okay, so tenancy requirements for tenant screening. Again, just low barrier screening procedures. Just really looking at with as far as their rental history and making sure that you're expanding your requirements as far as compliance goes when you have all the applications get reviewed. So demanding very restrictive requirements for applicants is something that we're hoping you'll be steering away from with this program. So you can't, and if they're getting a project-based voucher, you cannot screen based on credit history. And then it is subject to the mandated criminal screening as far as the lifetime sex offender and or convicted of manufacturing methamphetamines in public housing. So those two things are definitive no-go because of the vouchers. But we just ask that you consider your requirements that you're using for screening. And so that should be in your tenant selection plans that you provide. Okay. So, Priscilla, I did receive your information and we'll connect. So Jody, when you're talking, I'll work on getting some connections here. So we'll get on this. Just give me a second. The following are examples of low barrier tenant screening. So again, y'all get this PowerPoint. So then that way you can take a look and make sure that these are things that you're considering when you're looking at your screening. And here's a connection to the Alliance to End Homelessness. So I am going to turn the reins over to Jody, and she's going to talk a little bit about compliance for y'all.
Okay. Can you move it to the next slide, Alona, or do I have that capability? Thank you. So as far as the minimum compliance period goes, the HOME-ARP assisted rental units will comply with the requirements of the notice for a minimum compliance of 15 years, regardless of the amount of funding that's invested in the project or the activity being undertaken. DCA will impose the HOME-ARP rental requirements through a LURA and a LURC, which will be recorded on the property in accordance with Georgia recordation laws. The LURA will provide that units assisted with HOME-ARP comply with the requirements of the notice throughout the minimum 15-year compliance period, including but not limited to that units will be occupied by households that meet the definition of a qualifying population at the time of initial occupancy. Units available for low-income households will be continuously occupied by income-eligible households, and the units must comply with ongoing property condition standards throughout the compliance period. Someone who qualifies that is verified as being a qualified population at initial occupancy is always going to be eligible for that housing, because, someone could qualify as being homeless. Once they're housed, they're not homeless, but they'll continue to qualify for that unit designated for a qualifying population throughout the remainder of their tenancy. Next slide, Alona. Thank you. The property standards: once construction is complete, all HOME-ARP rental units must conform to HUD's minimum property standards and applicable local, state, or federal code requirements. HOME-ARP rental units must comply with all property standards applicable to rental projects required in 24 CFR. And the units with the property-based vouchers must comply with all the unit criteria established by DCA's Housing Choice Voucher Administration. There will be a property standards checklist in accordance with 24 CFR that will be made available to all owners and developers. DCA will approve the rental unit using the Inspire standards that will come into play the beginning of the year next year. And they will require and verify that each household that receives a property-based voucher has an executed lease that complies with the tenant protection requirements of the HOME-ARP notice. Next slide, Alona. And like I said, a few items to note. The requirements: a qualifying or low-income household that is not low income at the time of income recertification must pay the rent that complies with the over-income regulatory agreements. Requirements at 24 CFR, and the requirements for correcting any non-compliance using vacancies or unit redesignation is dependent on whether the HOME-ARP rental units are fixed or floating, and whether there are other funding sources like LIHTC that impose income or other restrictions on them. And like I was saying earlier, once an applicant applies for the housing and they are determined and verified to be a qualified population, one of those 4 qualified populations, they are always going to be eligible for the QP unit. An increase in a tenant's income does not constitute a good cause to evict or to refuse to renew a tenant's lease, regardless of the program requirements associated with other funding sources such as LIHTC. You're on mute, Alona. You want me to move forward?
Okay. Thanks, guys. So we have a lot of programmatic supports from DCA to help you through all of this, because we know that there's a lot to it. And so we have our website, and I'm going to actually, I need to bring up the website. We have a crosswalk that we're working on, program descriptions, templates, just a ton of stuff. We've been working really hard to make this all work out for y'all. So on our website, which is new, I hope you all have seen it. We have a great new website from our marketing and communications team. They did a splendid job. And it's really similar to other government sites out there that we have here in Georgia. So it's nice because it makes it all more seamless. But we have a section on there for HOME-ARP related links. We have our allocation plan and frequently asked questions. We have HUD's HOME-ARP website. So this is a place to really connect to a lot of different programs. And so we just really encourage you all to take a look at that and take a look at that website. Thank you, Jody, for posting that. We are also in development of a program manual. Instead of just the traditional, this is the great big thick thing. We're actually referring to a lot of other programs and kind of utilizing what others are doing as far as on the DCA team, in order to make sure that, again, we're seamless, we're aligning to what everyone else is doing. So that's why we've had more of a program manual aspect, because we are going to be referencing a lot of other programs at DCA that we're working with. So we have that. That's coming out, including inspection standards, reports and records. There is other reports and records, and one of them, just to the compliance piece that Jody was talking about too, is with the particular referrals and referencing the verification. You may need to be considering, and when we talk about this with the program manual, and we may need to do another kind of training on that. Well, I know we'll have to do more training, but like introduction to this is just know for the property managers out there, okay? HUD's been very specific around the requirements for verification of an individual's homeless status, okay? They have broken it down very specifically in the clinics that we've attended. So just know that we want to make sure that you are aware of that. We're going to train you on that, but there are going to be some requirements with regards to reporting. So when we're doing the files that we're looking at, we're going to have to make sure that you have the referrals that they're coming from. If you're referring people to places, they should be there, but also to make sure that there's good third-party verification. And if there's not, that there are steps that you take to get to that self-verification process. You have to go through all the other steps to make sure that the verification you have is the best one you could have received and, gotten. Yeah. So just my verbiage. So just know that we'll take you through these trainings. We're not there yet. We don't even have the money out yet. So, but we'll definitely let you know what to do, but just know that there may be some differences in how we report and record this program versus others. Again, we're going to try and align to everything that OPM is doing as much as possible, but there are going to be some one-offs with this program. So just be prepared. Okay. Also more tenant protections. So looking at your tenant selection plan, you guys may want to take, so to be proactive for the funding, looking at the referrals that are in the location and the resources in the location that you want to contact. Okay. Looking at that service plan, looking at tenant protections. So what does your tenant selection plan look like right now? And what can be tweaked in order to kind of work with what we have with HOME-ARP? Again, Jody has been tirelessly working on all of this. She actually has addendums for tenant selection plans and addendums for, or actually tenant selection plans themselves, if you want to go ahead and use those. And those will all be published at the beginning of next year. So just start thinking. We're not going to leave you guys just hanging out to dry on this program. We really want to make sure that you're set up for success. So we have a ton of examples that we're going to be giving out to y'all too. So just know that that's coming. So like I said, these are the templates that Jody's been tirelessly putting together. Everything from reasonable accommodations, lease addendums, intakes. We have a specific required, I guess, not application, but a form that someone would have to complete in order to show and justify if they're homeless or at risk of homelessness, or making sure that they fall into 4 QPs, everything like that. So just know that we're wanting to prepare you for success. We are going to have a crosswalk that we're publishing too. It's going to show HOME-ARP versus home with regards to rental housing. So that way you can kind of see how it's the same and where it's different. So then that way it makes a little bit more sense. Jody's put together some great scenarios too. So really talking through what you're going to do for recertification and for initial certification too. So then that way you can use those as examples. We have frequently asked questions. So if you guys do have additional questions, we also have a form that we put on for the webinar, and we'll probably keep that up if you guys have additional questions for HOME-ARP that we can answer and then put on the site. And so these are all the additional sites to look up additional HOME-ARP information. And we're at the end of the contact us. We can all breathe now. So thanks for putting that form out there. So if you guys have any additional questions, you're always on it, lady. Any additional questions, fill out the form. It's pretty easy, and it'll allow us to kind of be able to take some time and give you a really thorough answer. Because sometimes these webinars, we can do a good 80-90% usually of what we can answer, but sometimes we may just need a little bit more of that regulation information. I'm going to answer your question in a second, Ben, so just give me a minute. So now we're to the Q&A portion. So Ben asked, as an example, if we applied for a standard 9% application, but wanted to additionally include an embedded service provider for a separate facility on the same campus, targeting a smaller number of units for a qualified population, would the 70-30 rule apply to the entire development, or could it be carved out for the supportive services portion of the project? Wow. Okay. So Ben, this is a great question. I think it's a super relevant question. So as far as the service provision for HOME-ARP units, okay, like I said, we don't require an MOU. So any kind of MOU and specific organization you're working with is just extra great stuff. Okay, so that sounds really doable. As far as the 70-30 rule, that would apply just to the HOME-ARP units. So the units that we're paying for. So for example, if you happen to get, okay, so let's just say you have supportive housing already on site. I'm not even going to talk about the National Housing Trust funding, single site supportive housing, NOFO, or stable housing NOFO coming out. I'm just saying, what if you have a development that already, let's just call this a phase 2, okay? So you already have a group of individuals who are served who are probably very similar to the 4 QPs. Fabulous. The 70-30 rule would not apply to any of those units that you had before, even if they're a similar demographic or population. It would just apply to the HOME-ARP units of those qualified populations. Okay, so that would be the 70-30 piece. Plus, if you wanted to have 100% qualified populations because it's more in line with what you're wanting to do on your site, that's fine too, because it's 70% or more. So if you wanted to do 100% qualified populations, that's totally possible. So just know that whatever you do for single site supportive housing is going to be separate from our qualified populations, okay? And you would have to wait list the qualified populations based on first come, first serve for all 4 of them, okay? So you wouldn't be able to preference or limit the type of population you serve on your property, at least not with this particular application. Possibly with future applications, we're working that out. But at this time, you'd have to serve all 4 qualified populations with HOME-ARP units. So Ben, I hope that answers your question. Give me a thumbs up if we're good. Okay, so I'm going to answer Samantha's question. Okay, perfect. Is there a minimum required number of HOME-ARP units in development? Sorry if you missed that. No, it's fine. So the minimum units are probably right around 15. And the reason for that is because we're trying to get project-based vouchers on all the qualified population units. Okay. So, and the minimum that the project-based voucher program is asking for is 15 units. Now, let's say, well, let me preference 2 things. One is our population does not fall under the integrated supportive housing populations. Okay, so it's not considered, these aren't disabled populations. So therefore that 25% piece is not a part of HOME-ARP. Okay, so you can have half, you can even have the entire development qualified populations if you wanted to. So that's there is no real maximum. As far as a minimum goes, it kind of just depends on the vouchers. So you need 15 minimum vouchers for the DCA project-based voucher program. However, if you are being really, enterprising and you want to go and talk with your local public housing authority and they give you 10 units, that's a possibility. But again, we would really want to look at the cost per unit that you use for HOME-ARP. Okay, so we're not going to be okay if it's, we're going to try and stick to the around $300,000 or less per unit. So if we're spending $400,000 or $500,000 per unit, that's going to be way too much. So that's kind of what we're thinking. So it's a combination of how much money you're receiving from us, including what it's going to be about the cost per unit. So we can mess with that. But then also if you get a voucher contract and there's a minimum for those vouchers. So it really is kind of all of it. I hope that makes more sense. And only the 15 units are subject to the 70-30 split, correct? Okay, so if you're getting the 15 units that are project-based vouchers, okay, then there would have to be, you could either do 100% of those as far as project-based vouchers. So there's a shift, Jody, just with that. And I probably need to figure out the specific math for thing. I think it's like 3, 4, 6. I'm trying to do the math in my head real quick. Okay, so I think it's more like 18 to 20 units. So if we do the 300,000 for $5 million, okay, so that ends up being what, 15, 16, 17, 18 units. It would be 15 of those units would need to be QPs if they have project-based vouchers on them. And then the remaining units would have to be low-income units. So that's where the 70-30 rule kind of comes in. So there's a pretty good chance that more properties are going to have more than 70% of units on their site with project-based vouchers. Okay, let me say that again. There's a good chance if you're doing 15 units of project-based vouchers, which are also for QP units, there's a good chance that you'll have more than a 70% because you would have to go over that in order to do additional LIHTC or additional low income units. I feel like I'm making this more difficult than it needs to be as far as my explanation. So if you have 15 units that are project-based vouchers, those are going to be QP units. Okay, so if you have 20 units, then that would be a 75-25 split. Okay, so you have 20 units, 5 of them are low-income units, high home, and 15 of them are project-based vouchers that are QP units. That would be a 75-25 split. Okay, so those 15 units, if you're getting vouchers, they would need to be QPs. They can't be low-income units. And if you want 15 of those units to be less than, so say like you want 10 units to have a voucher, then we would need to work that out with our public housing authority, with DCA public housing or your local public housing authority. I don't know what keeps popping up behind me, to make sure that they can give you a contract for 10 units. I feel like I'm making this really difficult. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense to me.
I know
Yeah, when I first read the question, I was thinking,
Okay, good. Glad it makes sense.
you know, that she was thinking maybe the whole development would be the 70/30, and it's only the HOME-ARP units.
Right. Okay. Is there any other, I know we have about 5 more minutes. Are there any additional questions that we can answer for y'all? And or if you guys want to come off mute and ask questions, that's fine too. Great. That's awesome. Okay. I remember Jack used to do some fun things at these. What keeps popping up behind me? Used to do some fun things with these pregnant pauses. Sometimes he would just wait, and other times he would say fun stuff. So, good old Jack. Oh, it's a basket. That's what's over there. Okay. Great job. We can't unmute. Oh, you can't unmute. Okay. Let's see if we can fix that.
I was gonna tell a joke. So
Tell a joke. Yeah.
and Princess has heard this because I told it recently, but I laugh. I think it's the best joke in the whole wide world because I'm a geek. Did you hear the one about the semicolon that got arrested? He got 2 continuous sentences. Yeah.
I just great. Okay, allow mic for attendees.
I love geeky humor.
It's awesome. Okay. If someone wants to unmute, you can. I just opened it up. So Ben, if you wanted to ask another question, you should be able to unmute now.
I mainly just was, didn't want the deadening silence to make you feel like you were landing flat. It just was like she was hanging out there to dry. We had to say something. So it was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, good. I'm so glad. We're definitely, and know you guys, if you're talking, you're going to be on the recording. So just know that ahead of time. So, but thanks, Ben. And yeah, if you guys have any other questions, like Jody put in the form that we have, for, any additional HOME-ARP questions, we know that this is a very thick program. There's a lot to it, and it's different, and they did it just enough to be the same, where it gives you the illusion that it's always going to be just like home, and it's not. There are that are really not like home. It's a new program, and so we want to make sure that we're very clear on what's the same and then also what's different. So yeah. Okay, 2 minutes left, guys. Feel free to unmute, or you can go ahead and add something into the chat. There we go. Hi, Ben.
Hi there.
And you know what? Do you want to talk a little bit about your experience with the Institute in our last 2 minutes? I hear that you guys are having a pretty good time. Now, just as a quick, letting everyone know, we had the applications for the Institute at the in August, September. And so Ben is a part of 7 different groups that are going through the Institute right now. And it's for developers, property managers, and service providers to work together to build supportive housing in Georgia. So Ben, do you want to just give a few words about the Institute in our last few minutes or so?
Sure. Especially how it kind of dovetails with what we've been talking about today, which is, how to finance these good programs. But the desire is there across the board, I think in every LIHTC development to see an embedded service provider, synthesize the community into how to get into this housing. So we're partnered with the Veterans Empowerment Organization. So when I asked my question about HOME-ARP funding for a veterans component, it would be specific units, and I think all 4 categories of the QP apply within the veterans realm, not just because that they see everybody across the spectrum, but we're also trying to keep the emergency housing separate from the normal housing, and they might graduate out of that and move on to the rest of the LIHTC property. But it's a lot of fun to see everybody in the group and everybody's different, everybody trying to figure out how to get all integrated. And this is a great way to bring extra resources into the program to help get that component activated and rolling.
That's great. Well, I'm glad that you guys are having such a great time, and I hear that there's been some good networking in the group too. And we've even heard that some developers are like, "Oh my gosh, I want more of my staff to go through this just to kind of get a better idea of what's available and maybe how to negotiate and go through, all the different requirements of supportive housing." So, is that a correct? Are we hearing correctly?
Oh,
We
yeah.
get little bits and pieces from CSH.
Absolutely. And I think it's just it's a foreshadowing that, we're not just building housing anymore. We've
Yeah.
got to be an integrated pathway to get people out of different needy communities into housing and help people who are ready to graduate out of supportive housing out into, owned housing, so that we're meeting the whole spectrum. But
Absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, DCA helps people get into owned housing too. We have mortgage programs and everything. So definitely go on our website if you want some more of that information, because that's absolutely correct, Ben. We definitely want to we're just part of the great big continuum that helps move people from homelessness and unstable housing into owning their own home. So that's awesome that you guys are moving in that direction. That's so good.
is that like the Rural Workforce Housing Initiative or something like that, or a different program?
That's part of it. Georgia Dream is actually what I was referring to. So, yeah, thanks, Jody. You got it again.
My pleasure.
So we have some great home ownership programs that will actually help pay for down payments, like a good portion of them with DCA. So if you guys want to get to the link, that's there. That will get you the home ownership information. Okay, and so there's a great new question. Okay, signing up for the Institute, that's a good quick question. The Institute right now is closed. We're going to open it up again next year for applications. So the teams have already been selected, but I wanted to tease you guys to let you know that this is coming back, and the Institute is a great opportunity if you have the chance to do it. And you just have to be sure to attend all of the sessions. But from what I hear, Ben, the sessions have been really, interactive. A lot of the teams have been meeting outside of the groups and then really excited to get together, as far as I understand it. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's been great.
Okay, good. Good.
It's a lot of fun to interface with, teams that you might otherwise see as competitors. But then when you get in this environment, we're all friendly competitors, but it's nice that you're really sharing ideas and sharing resources and insights, and it's been a good experience.
That's awesome. That really makes me really happy to hear. I'm going to answer a quick question. Is preference given to experienced development teams, or is there room for new developers to get approved for funding who've never worked with DCA and HUD? With the 9% round in beginning of next year to Deborah, there is going to need to be experienced development teams. So if you're not experienced and you want to get into the development realm with DCA, I would recommend finding a team to partner with, because you do need to be certified in order to build in Georgia with our tax credit program at this time. So that's what we're doing for this round. There's a potential that we may go ahead and do loans a little bit differently in the future, but right now this is what we're doing in order to guarantee moving forward with the developments. So just know that. And if you want to, Deborah, one of the recommendations that we always give, because we cannot recommend any developer to partner with, that's what DCA can't do. However, we have all the information of development teams that have been working with DCA and have been selected to develop. So we always recommend reaching out to local developers based on our select list that we've had. They've been up there since, I think, 1999, 1995. And so, finding a developer that you'd like to reach out to and contact for the funding is something that you can definitely do. And then next year, when we do the Institute, we also did a matchmaking session. I don't know if you were a part of that, Ben, but we did a matchmaking session where we were working to put developer teams together with property managers and then also with service providers. So we had a chance for them to all talk to each other and kind of see who would work well with, each other. So that's an option too. So I hope that answers your question, Deborah. Okay, that's great. Well, we're at 4:36, everyone. Thanks, Dylan, for posting the housing tax credit program too. I really appreciate it. That's great. And we're 6 minutes over, everyone. So I want to definitely honor your time. I'm so glad. Thank you, Ben, for all of your insights with the Institute. That's something that we were really excited to participate in and help do. And then if you guys have any questions, just reach out to us. You got our email addresses and we'd be more than happy to help. And right now we're not in a quiet period, so we can even have some conversations if you want to about kind of getting some just basic information about HOME-ARP if you want to talk to us. Okay. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. If you have any other questions, let us know. We're going to be sending out the PowerPoint and the recording shortly, probably within the next day or two. It may be the beginning of next week, just considering it's a Thursday. And I think that's it. So yeah, I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
You guys take care.
Thanks.
Bye.